The morning in the small town began as usual, with the familiar sounds of everyday life. Birds chirped melodiously from the ancient trees outside the police station, blending with the crunch of bicycle tires on the road and the laughter of street vendors at the marketplace. Soft sunlight filtered through the station's glass windows, creating scattered patches of light on the tiled floor. Keanu Reeves sat hunched over his desk, flipping through the towering stack of case files, his legs casually stretched out under the table. He worked with intense focus, seemingly unaffected by the gentle laughter of his colleague Maddie, who was chatting with another officer behind him. The old ceiling fan turned slowly, emitting a rhythmic creak that added to the serene, somewhat monotonous atmosphere of the station. But that tranquility was quickly shattered when the front door burst open, producing a long, piercing sound that seemed to tear through the silence. Everyone in the station instinctively looked up, but quickly returned to their work, accustomed to the footsteps of local residents coming in with trivial complaints. Yet just seconds later, all eyes turned back toward the door, and the atmosphere in the station abruptly froze. Through the doorway appeared a towering figure, a horse with a reddish-brown coat caked in mud from head to hoof. Its breathing was heavy, strong but labored, with each exhale forming faint clouds in the chilly morning air. On its back was a small, trembling foal, its front legs gripping tightly onto its mother's natural saddle, as if holding on with the last ounce of strength. The mare's gaze was fixed straight ahead, unwavering despite the astonished stares surrounding her. Each of her slow, deliberate steps echoed with a low thud on the hard, tiled floor, as though she carried the weight of a tense and untold story. Reaching the center of the room, the mare carefully knelt down, her legs visibly trembling. With a cautious motion, she allowed the foal to slide off her back onto the floor. The entire room fell silent. No one spoke or moved, their eyes transfixed on the strange creature that had suddenly appeared in their midst. Not a single whisper broke the stillness, as though everyone was caught in the surreal moment unfolding before them. After ensuring her foal was safely on the ground, the mare turned abruptly and galloped out of the station, her hooves echoing loudly in the now eerily quiet space. Keanu Reeves stood up abruptly, concern flashing in his eyes. He quickly knelt beside the small foal, placing a hand on its sweat-drenched body. "What happened to you?" he murmured, his eyes searching the trembling creature before him for answers. Barely a minute later, the sound of hooves echoed once more outside the door, this time quicker and more urgent. The mare returned, this time carrying another foal on her back. Her coat was even more matted with mud, and her eyes now seemed to radiate an intense tension. She carefully placed the second foal on the floor before once again turning and departing without hesitation. By now, murmurs of confusion rippled through the station. "What is she doing?" an officer whispered, bewildered. But no one had an answer. It was as though the entire station had been drawn into an extraordinary spectacle, with every movement of the horse holding their undivided attention. The sound of hooves came for the third time, heavier and more fatigued than before. When the mare returned, her steps were sluggish, almost stumbling. On her back lay a third foal, limp except for its wide-open eyes, which reflected utter exhaustion. The mare staggered into the station with a weariness that spoke volumes. Reaching the center, she tilted her body to let the last foal slide down, and then, as if she had given all she could, her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold, tiled floor. Keanu knelt beside the mare, his hand gently stroking her matted mane as though offering comfort. "You did so well," he whispered, his voice soft but filled with concern. The mare's tired eyes met his, full of weariness but also trust. Maddie hurried over with a large blanket while other officers lifted the foals onto it to keep them warm. The familiar sounds of life outside now seemed muffled, replaced by the heavy, almost oppressive stillness within the station. Suddenly the mare's head shot up, her ears standing erect, her entire body tense. Her gaze fixed on the door, filled with a mix of wariness and fear. Keanu immediately noticed the change. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Maddie glanced at him, worry etched on her face. "What do you think is scaring her?" she asked softly. Keanu didn't answer. His eyes remained locked on the door as he slowly rose to his feet, his hand instinctively resting on the holster at his side. He walked cautiously toward the door, gripping the handle, and pushed it open. Light spilled in from outside, but instead of the peaceful scene typical of the small town, Keanu sensed something unusual. At the far end of the road near the edge of the forest, a gray truck stood motionless. Its windows were tinted black, obscuring the view inside. Keanu's gaze lingered on the vehicle, his expression sharpening with alertness. Turning back to Maddie, he met her eyes, and in that brief exchange they shared an unspoken concern. The mare remained lying on the floor, her gaze unwaveringly fixed on the door as if waiting for something to happen. Keanu stepped back into the station, his voice calm but firm. "She didn't come here just for help. She's running from something." The reddish-brown mare lay on the pile of straw in the temporary stall, her breathing steady, but her eyes betraying a deep tension. Her coat, matted with mud and dust, had relaxed slightly after being tended to by the officers at the police station, but each small movement of her body still spoke of exhaustion and anxiety. The three skinny foals huddled together under a blanket, seeking warmth from each other and their worn-out mother. Keanu Reeves stood near the stall, holding a cup of cold coffee in his hand, his eyes fixed on the horses. The image of the silver-gray truck parked at the edge of the forest lingered in his mind, every odd detail etching itself deeper into his thoughts. Maddie approached from the dispatch desk, her face weighed down with concern. "I checked with dispatch. There are no missing horse reports matching her description," she said, her voice low but clear. "But this morning there was a call about suspicious activity near the forest. Someone saw a man loading something onto a truck." Keanu frowned, his expression darkening. "A silver-gray truck?" he asked, his voice dropping. Maddie nodded. "The caller didn't stay on the line, but it sounds like it matches." Keanu turned back to the mare. Her ribs protruded starkly through her dusty coat, as though she had endured a prolonged period of starvation and mistreatment. "She's not just a stray," he murmured, almost to himself. "Someone abandoned her. Or worse." The door to the station swung open again, this time not to reveal another unexpected visitor but Dr. Lincoln, the town veterinarian, with her medical kit in hand. Her calm, confident demeanor instantly softened the tense atmosphere in the room. "I hear you have a special patient," she said, her eyes landing on the mare and her foals. Keanu led her to the stall where Maddie was ready to assist. "She came here on her own," he explained. "We've done what we could, but they're in rough shape." Dr. Lincoln knelt beside the mare, her hands gentle and practiced. She examined each wound, each sign of exhaustion on the animal's body, then turned her attention to the three foals curled up nearby. After a few minutes, she stood and spoke. "She's severely dehydrated and exhausted, but luckily there are no major injuries. The foals are malnourished, but with proper care they'll recover. She's been pushing herself to the brink to keep them alive." Keanu let out a small sigh of relief, a faint smile touching his lips. He crouched closer to the mare, his gaze softening. "You're a fighter, aren't you, girl?" he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. But the moment of calm was fleeting. The mare suddenly let out a low, sharp snort, her body tensing, ears pricking forward as though catching a sound no one else could hear, her eyes fixed on the station door, unwavering. Keanu straightened, sensing the shift in the air. He turned to Maddie. "Keep an eye on her and the foals. I'm going to check out that truck." Maddie grabbed his arm before he could step away. "Be careful," she said, her voice dropping. "If someone's after her, they won't give up easily." Keanu nodded. his face set with resolve. He stepped out of the station, his heartbeat quickening with each step. The silver-gray truck still sat motionless at the end of the road, a cold specter in the dim afternoon light. Keanu approached cautiously, his hand instinctively resting on the holster at his side, the tension in his body mounting with every step. As he closed the distance, he noticed deep scratches running along the side of the truck, as if something, or someone, had desperately tried to escape. Peering into the bed of the truck through a small gap, he spotted ropes and a filthy blanket, both smeared with mud and faint traces of blood. His jaw tightened, a heavy weight settling in his chest. This was no coincidence. Someone had done something terrible. Looking down, he saw hoofprints pressed deeply into the dirt, leading from the truck into the dense forest beyond. The cold air wrapped around him, and the eerie stillness of the woods amplified the unease coursing through him. He turned back toward the station where Maddie was waiting, her expression taut with worry. As he stepped inside, her eyes immediately locked onto his face, reading the gravity of the situation. "We've got an emergency," he announced, his voice tense. "The truck shows clear signs of containment, and there are tracks leading into the forest. We can't wait any longer." Maddie's face paled, but she maintained her composure. "I'll call for backup," she said, reaching for the radio. Keanu shook his head. "We don't have time. If they're watching, they won't wait for us." As if to emphasize his words, the mare suddenly let out a loud, urgent whinny, her eyes fixed on the window, her body rigid. Keanu wasted no time, turning back to Maddie. "Get the transport ready. We need to move her and the foals to safety before it's too late." Maddie nodded, though her eyes remained clouded with concern. "And the people behind the truck?" she asked. Keanu's jaw tightened, his gaze unwavering. "They won't stop us." Keanu Reeves knelt beside the mare, his hand gently touching its dirt-matted mane. "We're going to get you out of here, girl," he whispered, his voice a blend of resolve and reassurance. The mare's eyes, weary and trembling, held a glimmer of trust, as though it understood his words. Behind him, Maddie hurriedly prepared the specialized transport vehicle, the engine rumbling to life, promising a swift escape from danger. The air felt heavy with tension, punctuated only by the faint sound of distant hoofbeats and the mare's labored breathing. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from outside, like metal colliding violently, shattering the fragile silence. It was followed by heavy footsteps, their deliberate pace saturating the atmosphere with unease. Keanu Reeves sprang to his feet, his hand instinctively moving to the holstered gun at his side. "Stay with them," he ordered, his sharp gaze darting to Maddie and Dr. Lincoln, who continued tending to the foals. Alongside Peter, another officer, Keanu moved toward the door, his sense of danger sharpening with every step. He pushed the door open, revealing the source of his unease. Outside, the gray pickup truck still sat ominously, its stillness now feeling like a threat. Near the vehicle stood a tall man in a worn, tattered jacket, his face obscured by the brim of a low-hanging cap. His eyes, shadowed and cold, betrayed no emotion as he observed the police presence. Keanu called out, his voice steady but laced with caution. "Can I help you?" The man took a few slow steps forward, his deep, rough voice breaking the tension. "I'm just here to take back what's mine." Keanu's gaze didn't waver as his jaw tightened. "If it truly belonged to you, it wouldn't be here in this condition. She came here seeking help." The man stopped, irritation flickering across his face. "That's none of your business," he spat, his words like sharp blades. "Hand her over and I'll be on my way." Keanu stepped forward, blocking the man's path. "That's not going to happen. Turn around and leave. Now." His voice was firm, his tone as unyielding as steel. The tension in the air thickened as the two men locked eyes, neither willing to back down. The tall man's lips curled into a cold, menacing smile that sent a chill down Keanu's spine. Before Keanu could react, another figure emerged from the tree line, holding a gleaming crowbar. Keanu raised a hand to signal Peter to hold position. "Stay calm," he said softly but authoritatively, his eyes fixed on the new arrival. "The vehicle is ready." Maddie's urgent voice called out from behind, the stress in her tone unmistakable. Without turning, Keanu barked, "Get them on the truck now." Maddie understood immediately, moving swiftly with Dr. Lincoln to guide the horses into the vehicle. Despite her exhaustion, the mare struggled to her feet as if knowing this was her only chance to escape. The foals, wrapped in blankets, were carefully placed inside the truck, each movement precise yet urgent. Outside, Keanu remained face to face with the two men. His hand hovered near his gun, his posture unwavering, his focus razor-sharp. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Leave now before this gets worse." The tall man smirked, his expression a blend of defiance and menace. "Do you really think you can stop us?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Keanu's eyes narrowed, his voice steady and unyielding. "Try me." For a moment the world seemed to pause. The tall man hesitated, his eyes darting toward his truck. Slowly he began to back away, though his gaze never left Keanu, each step a promise of unresolved threats. Eventually, he and his accomplice retreated toward the tree line, their departure deliberate and unhurried, signaling that this was far from over. As they disappeared into the shadows of the forest, Keanu turned back to the transport vehicle. The mare and her foals were safely inside. He signaled to Maddie, "Drive. Don't stop for anything." Maddie nodded, closing the doors and climbing into the driver's seat. The vehicle pulled away, its taillights fading into the thin morning mist. A fleeting sense of relief washed over Keanu, but it was quickly overshadowed by the lingering unease that this confrontation was only the beginning. Inside the truck, Maddie gripped the wheel tightly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror. In the back, Dr. Lincoln sat beside the mare, gently stroking her mane. "You're safe now," he murmured softly, his voice soothing. The mare, though still trembling, began to relax, her weary eyes slowly closing. The foals curled up beside her, comforted by her warmth. Maddie glanced at them through the mirror, her expression softening. "Hang in there, girl," she whispered, as much to herself as to the horse. Back at the station, Keanu turned to Peter, his tone sharp and decisive. "We need to stay on high alert. They won't let this go easily." Peter nodded, immediately organizing patrols around the area. Keanu picked up his radio, his voice steady but firm. "We need a search unit. Evidence suggests illegal activity connected to the gray pickup truck. Prepare for a sweep of the nearby forest." He lingered at the doorway for a moment, his thoughts racing. Though the immediate danger seemed to have passed, he knew deep down that the fight to protect these animals and uncover the truth was far from over. Keanu Reeves was ready. Whatever came next, he wouldn't let them win. Keanu Reeves felt a wave of anxiety wash over him as Peter burst into the room, his face drenched in sweat, his eyes wide with panic. "The truck is gone," Peter said between gasps, his breath ragged. Keanu didn't need further explanation. It was all clear. Grabbing his radio, his voice turned deep and resolute as he barked into it. "Maddie, do you copy? They're heading your way. Get out of there now." At the veterinary clinic, Maddie's face turned pale at the warning. She looked at Dr. Lincoln, who had also caught on to the gravity of the situation. There was no time to hesitate. They sprang into action immediately. Dr. Lincoln quickly prepared for transport, carefully cradling each foal and gently placing them into a large crate lined with warm blankets. Maddie helped him, guiding the exhausted mare to her feet. The mare, weak to the point of near collapse, still tried her best to cooperate, her eyes filled with a fierce determination that was almost suffocating in its intensity. In the background, the low roar of an engine grew louder, echoing ominously. Maddie glanced out the window and spotted the silver-gray truck hurtling toward them. "They're here!" she shouted, her voice breaking with fear. Without hesitation, Maddie and Dr. Lincoln rushed to load the mare and her foals into the clinic's small transport van, securing the doors just as the silver truck pulled into the lot. Maddie leapt into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The van lurched forward, speeding away mere seconds before the gray truck reached them. The chase began. The silver-gray truck loomed dangerously close behind them, the gap between the two vehicles narrowing with each passing moment. Maddie could feel the pressure mounting as her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her fingers trembling but steadfast. Her foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, the van's engine straining under the demand. From the back of the van came soft, plaintive whimpers from the mare. Despite her exhaustion, she shifted her body protectively in front of her foals, her sharp eyes reflecting a relentless maternal instinct. On the narrow, dusty rural road, the scenery blurred into streaks of green and brown. The overhanging trees formed a shadowy tunnel, amplifying the tension. Maddie's heart pounded in her chest, and the relentless roar of the pursuing engine sounded like a predator closing in. "They're not going to stop!" she shouted, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. Dr. Lincoln clung tightly to his seat, his knuckles white against the armrest. "How do we get out of this?" he asked, his voice tinged with panic. Maddie didn't answer. Her mind was laser-focused on one objective: keeping the horses safe. The road ahead twisted sharply, the turns becoming more treacherous. Maddie knew that even a small mistake could spell disaster. The silver-gray truck suddenly surged forward, slamming into the back of the van. The impact sent the vehicle skidding, its tires screeching against the gravel. Maddie screamed, struggling to regain control. "Come on, girl," she muttered under her breath, urging both herself and the van forward. Behind her, the mare let out a low growl, her eyes glinting with an unyielding will to fight despite her physical exhaustion. The pursuing truck closed the distance again, veering dangerously close. The driver leaned out of his window, shouting curses that Maddie could barely hear over the chaos. Ignoring him, she pressed the accelerator to the floor, pushing the van through the winding road with reckless precision. Every second felt like an eternity. The tension in the van so thick it was almost suffocating. Suddenly, a flicker of red and blue lights appeared in the distance, cutting through the shadows of the trees. Maddie's breath hitched. "We're almost there!" she yelled, a mix of hope and urgency in her voice. But the gray truck showed no sign of stopping. It rammed into the van again, harder this time, sending Maddie and Dr. Lincoln jolting forward. Maddie clenched her teeth, her grip on the steering wheel tightening as though it was the only thing keeping her tethered to survival. Finally, the van burst out of the forest into a wider clearing. Ahead, two police cruisers blocked the road, their lights flashing brightly. Maddie slammed on the brakes, the van screeching to a halt. Her body sagged against the seat, overwhelmed by relief. In the rearview mirror, she saw the gray truck skidding to a stop, its tires throwing up clouds of dirt as smoke rose from the overheated brakes. Police officers leapt out of their vehicles, weapons drawn. "Stop right there. Hands where we can see them!" they shouted. After a moment of hesitation, two men climbed out of the truck, their faces twisted with frustration and defeat. They were quickly subdued and handcuffed. Leading the charge, Keanu Reeves approached them with a steely determination in his eyes. Once the men were secured in the back of a patrol car, Keanu turned his attention to Maddie, who was still sitting frozen in the driver's seat. "Are you okay?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. Maddie nodded weakly, her legs trembling as she stepped out of the van. In the back, the mare let out a faint whinny, her gaze fixed on the men being taken away, as though ensuring the danger was truly over. Keanu knelt beside the mare, his hand brushing gently through her mane. "You did so well, girl," he murmured, his voice heavy with gratitude. Maddie stood beside him, her face weary but lit with a faint smile. She knew they had done everything they could to protect the horses. In the flashing police lights, the mare finally closed her eyes, as if she had finally found the safety she had been fighting for. In the days that followed, the story of Laser, a reddish-brown mare, and her brave journey became the centerpiece of the small town. Local newspapers began publishing articles about Laser, portraying her not just as a lucky survivor but as a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and unconditional love for her offspring. A photograph of Laser and her 3 foals, captured as they rested peacefully together in the police station yard, graced the front pages of many publications, spreading a powerful message about family bonds and resilience. Keanu Reeves, who adopted Laser, became her devoted caretaker. One morning, as he led Laser to the open field behind the station to let her roam freely, Maddie approached, holding a basket of red apples. "She deserves a reward after everything she's been through," Maddie said with a gentle smile, setting the basket down in front of Laser. The mare lowered her head, sniffed the fragrant apples, and began nibbling on them delicately. Her eyes, which had once been wary and guarded, now reflected a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. "What did you think when you first saw her?" Maddie asked, her gaze following Laser as the horse leisurely ate. Keanu stood with his hands in his pockets, a pensive expression on his face. "I thought about how she managed to get through it all," he said slowly. "She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her kids. It made me reflect a lot." Maddie nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "Laser didn't just save her foals. She's changed the way we see our responsibility toward other living beings." Shortly after, a campaign to raise awareness about animal protection was launched. A community gathering was organized in the front yard of the police station, where townspeople came together to hear Laser's story. Keanu, alongside a group of animal welfare advocates, stood before the crowd, speaking about the importance of treating animals humanely, especially those most vulnerable. Posters featuring Laser and the slogan, "Protect, Don't Harm," were displayed throughout the town, from the local grocery store to the public library. At the event, a boy of about 10 years old, his messy brown hair and bright round eyes filled with wonder, timidly approached Laser. In his hand was a small yellow wildflower, which he shyly extended toward the horse. Laser, as if understanding his intent, lowered her head, allowing him to tuck the flower gently into her mane. "She's so beautiful," the boy said to Keanu, his voice trembling with sincerity. Keanu knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She's not just beautiful, she's incredibly brave," he replied with a smile. "Just like you, being brave enough to show her kindness." Laser's story also caught the attention of neighboring communities. Anonymous donors sent a significant contribution to the town to support the creation of an animal rescue center, a haven for mistreated or abandoned animals to find a new home. Maddie, who had always shown a special affection for animals, volunteered to work at the center. One late afternoon, as she stood with Keanu watching Laser and her foals grazing in the distance, she said, "Laser taught me that every living being deserves a chance, and I want to be part of making that happen." Laser became more than a symbol of courage in adversity. She became the mascot of the police department. She frequently appeared at community events, bridging the gap between law enforcement and residents. The town's children adored her, often flocking to the station to pet her and feed her treats. In the eyes of the adults, Laser represented hope and unity, embodying the resilience that the entire community aspired to. Keanu, usually a reserved man, was occasionally seen standing quietly beside Laser at the end of the day. Once Maddie asked him, "What do you think about when you look at her?" He smiled gently, his eyes soft. "I think about how she's changed us," he said, "and I think about the responsibility we have to other living beings. She's done her part. Now it's our turn." Maddie looked at him, sensing the deep sincerity in his words. The story of Laser didn't just transform how the small town viewed animals. It illuminated profound human values. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and love can bring about extraordinary change. In Laser's shining eyes, Keanu and the townspeople saw not just life, but the essence of protecting and cherishing what truly matters in the world. Let Laser's story inspire you to take action. Together we can make a difference, not just for the vulnerable animals in need of protection, but also for the communities we hold dear. Don't forget to leave a comment or share this story if it touched your heart. You can even write a letter to Laser. She'll always be here to listen to kindness from around the world. We believe that, just like Laser, you too can be a symbol of positive change.